apparently. What I want to talk to you about today is things that have been gleaned from research I have done in Peru, in Belize, in rural Ireland, and in Tuscany. And I also want to bring some of the experience of the Sustainable Preservation Initiative, specifically one project in Peru. As I think we said, I'm on the board of SPI, which is an NGO that funds economic development projects and promotion of archaeological conservation. What I want to do is focus on the issues of how do you economically and culturally empower a local community. What are the political issues? What are the economic issues? What are the development issues? And are there ways to enable communities to have some control over their cultural and archaeological resources? And what are the implications of that? We're going to do this by talking about it a little generally and then move forward from some learnings rather than give you a series of case studies. I'll give them to you in fragments, okay? We'll try not to mess it up this time. What you're looking at for your information is the areas. This is up on the top left is the Temple to Viracocha in Rachi, Peru, which is the location of one of the groups I spent a lot of time with, the Asociación Inquiacta. This is in San Jose de Moro, Peru. It was an early project of the Sustainable Preservation Initiative. We have a gentleman there who has reverse engineered how to make mocha fine line pottery. He produces absolutely brilliant stuff, and he's been training people on how to do that. This is Rocca San Silvestro, which is part of the Parque della Valle Fornia in Tuscany, and we're going to talk about that a lot. The symbol of the Maya Center Women's Group in Belize, which is one of the groups I spent a lot of time with also. Very interesting parallels and differences between Rachi and Belize. And this is the Burren Center in Kilfenora, Ireland, which is a community project focused on cultural heritage and archaeology in the region just south of Galway called the Burren. Okay, and I haven't screwed it up. Communities have become a major topic in archaeology and heritage management. You probably run into this in other courses, but they ripple through UN charters. They ripple through the ethical codes of the associations in the industry. You see obligations to interact with communities, to support communities. The Faro Convention talks about this. There's lots of human rights discussions that are talking about this. Local people are increasingly becoming, if you will, an ethical obligation of archaeologists and cultural heritage managers. The days when one could go into a country and do what you did and walk out the door and perhaps never even talk to people who live locally, or at most order them around as they dig holes for you, are really over. And if you live in a country that has large indigenous populations, Australia, New Zealand, United States, Canada, for example, the ethical precepts of the entire discipline get wrapped around what do we do with and for our indigenous communities, and increasingly those communities have been empowered to control their own heritage rather than have it managed by folks outside. So this whole issue of community roles and archaeology's obligations to communities has become very, very important. It's also a matter of practicality for archaeologists. Increasingly, if you go back to the history of public archaeology, the first book on the topic by McGinsey is actually an argument that we need public archaeology because we need the public. In those days, we're back in the 50s, 70s, I guess, as I recall. We need it for two reasons. One is we need labor. He was looking for volunteer labor, public participation. And the other was we need political support. We need people to pay for this. They're not going to pay for this if they don't see some value in it, and they're not going to see some value in it if people are excluded from the process of studying and exploring their own past. So that's still true. That's still true. We need money, we need political support, and that view of the world, and we can use labor, although much of the world is doing a very good job of trying to prevent non-professionals from participating in archaeology. We also, as we discussed yesterday, have seen that archaeology is deeply embedded in economies, through tourism, through urban development, and all of these activities inevitably mean that what conservationists and archaeologists do is going to intersect with communities at the local level. You can't avoid dealing with people nowadays. So we have to know how to do that. So you have a practical need, an ethical need, and if you will, an unavoidability due to the economic interchange that says that communities are now really at the center of the discipline in many respects. That doesn't mean we're very good at understanding them or knowing how to deal with them. Now, just to begin the case studies quickly, Asociación Indiacta is a group of artisans in a little village in Cusco, about halfway between Cusco and Lake Titicaca in the Andes of Peru. It was a village that was repopulated from about 150 years ago by farmers, had been abandoned after the Spanish conquistadores defeated the Inca. It is the site of the second largest, on the previous slide, the second largest Inca ruin, standing ruin in the region outside of Tiwanaku in Bolivia. And it is, it was at the time the association was started essentially an abandoned site. There were people living on it. No one was visiting the community to see it. Part of that was because the Sendero Luminoso revolution was in full force in that area. You took your life in your hands to go out there in those days. As Sendero Luminoso was defeated, the Peruvian government decided that they wanted to use cultural heritage to develop the economy of Peru, in particular looking at Machu Picchu as an anchor, and then the rest of what they call the Sacred Valley, which includes a lot of sites of equivalent importance to Rakchi, all the way down from Cusco, out from Cusco in the north, and then heading south down to Titicaca. So they began to promote tourism, and this was historically a ceramics town. They made pots. They usually didn't paint them. They shipped them north, and they were decorated in the north, and they've been doing that for generations. One of the ceramicists in town, realizing what was going on economically, said, you know, if we decorated our own pots and could capture the tourists when they come through the village, we could make more money than selling undecorated pots up. So he organized the association and pulled together initially about 20 families, ultimately half the village families, there's about 100 families in the village, half of them in the group, joined up and created a daily marketplace, 7 days a week. Kind of like the markets down here, they set them up in the morning and turn them out at night. And they are there when the tourist buses come. They also were very canny and put in flush toilets. They're the only flush toilets between Cusco and Lake Titicaca. They're sort of where you want them if you're on a tour bus. And so the tour buses come in and they go through they stop for a rest stop, see the site, and go through the marketplace on the way out. It has grown, the site has grown from 1,000 visitors at the turn of the century as the Gould is going down to about 110,000 a year now. It's one of the top 10 sites in Peru. And this organization has really become it's not just the economic engine for the women in the community. Common theme runs into these places. It's the women who drive these things. The men are often gone doing work somewhere else, and the women are there taking care of the kids. This is what pays for the school tuitions. This is what holds things together. It's also the social center of the community. come back to how it's run a little later, but it's been an immensely successful enterprise driven by local people. The Burren Center in Ireland is about 40 years old, a little more than that. It was started in some sense for the same sort of reason. The town of St. Kilkenora had been a market town where there were regular cattle markets and that sort of thing. It was a diocesan center. It has a cathedral in it that goes back to the 8th century. And it was a major religious and economic center of the region until the railway went in the late 19th century and bypassed the town. And gradually the town began to shrivel up until in the 1980s, the town, 70s, the town was basically, in the words of practically everybody I ever talked to, they were derelict. And the villagers, this was at a time when jets were just starting to cross the Atlantic. In those days, they couldn't make it all the way to Paris or London, so they stopped at Shannon Airport near Galway in order to refuel so they could make the rest of the hop into Europe. Shannon therefore suddenly became a big entrepreneur. Freight planes would go in, the tourist planes would go in, and they had a lot of money, and the Shannon Airport Authority was trying to develop the region. A bunch of the leaders of the town, the local priest, the local school teacher, one of the local farmers, said, we've got to do something about the town. They invited the Shannon Airport people out to see if they could help. They came, long story short, they put up some money to build the first iteration of the Burren Center, which is structured not like at all like Associazione Inquiacta. It is rather structured. It's literally using the standard forms of the Irish Cooperative Society and all the agricultural cooperatives and all that work. It's technically a profit-making business, although they never made much money and never succeeded in it. But it runs like a corporation, but it is also, in reality, the engine that drives the town. When the center got created, now tour buses had a place to go to learn something about the region. Again, fast forward 40 years, there are lots of tourist sites there. There's a World Heritage site called the Cliffs of Moher. The Burren is now a major tourist destination with literally a few million people going out there to look at the archaeology, and the natural and cultural heritage there is unbelievable. It's one of the most unbelievable places in the world. Literally, it's littered with ring forts and portal tombs and stuff like that, and amazing geography. So, but all of that started from the Burren Center. And again, we'll come back to the governance issues, but you have a community-based project that's been tremendously impactful, building off of leveraging the resources of archaeology and heritage and doing it with local leadership. Associazione Inquiacta never needed much money. Burren Center has absorbed several million pounds and then euros to build what it's got. Now, the first question in all this, I told you I was going to do this. The first question in all this is always, what is a community? I will posit this is one of the most abused, overused, and ill-understood terms in our field. The other one is sustainable. But we don't have time to deal with sustainable today. As you all know, I'm sure you've been in discussions already about what's a community, who's a community. There's Anderson's concept of imagined communities. Communities can be, people will talk about the community here in Padova. They'll talk about the Italian-American community, the diaspora of Italians spread all over the world who are in some sense a community. There are Catholic communities, things like that. What I find, certainly when you get into meetings where people start talking about community, is very quickly they ignore the nuances and then romanticize it. We have to do things for the community. Well, doing things for the community, if you don't have a clear sense of the realities of what happens in communities and you don't have a clear sense of their complications and implications, usually is a failure. My working definition, when I think about this issue, is you have to think about a community geographically. Padova is a community, no question about it. That does not mean one should romantically view Padova as a wonderful, homogeneous place where everybody gets along. I doubt it does. They never do. When you think about what are you going to do with the community, recognize that what you're dealing with in the real world is the people where you are, and their issues and their needs and their priorities and their concerns, and any other view of the world, particularly a romantic one you might drag in along with you, that you're going to go down and help somebody in some poor country, that's got to be thrown out the window. You then have to say to yourself, okay, how do I help the people in this community that I'm dealing with to achieve what they want to achieve? Because frankly, any other approach will fail. And we'll see how that happens.
Just returning a bit to the sense of community. What is a community? Because this is a huge problem, and it's one which we discuss continuously among us. What is a community? Among them who just see problems in identifying a community, and others that say, as you said, well, let's imagine there's a community and let's think what to do about them. We, most of people here, as medieval archaeologists, if we work in a city, it's more difficult, but if we work in a territory, rural territory or a valley or things like this, communities, in much cases, were created in the Middle Ages or developed in villages in the Middle Ages, and they have not changed so much geographically. So we can have also not only a geographical, but also an historical link.
In those circumstances.
So it's harder still.
The issue what I take with issue with how you in the field is the belief that just because it's a community and it's got a history and there are lots of people there, that therefore it's a homogeneous thing. It is anything but. Okay? The Museo della Ceramica in Piombino is one of the museums associated with the Parque del Valdeconia system. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Very different notion of community. Geographically, it's 5 legal commune who came together in this park system. It covers a huge chunk of Livorno, and there are lots of issues. The reason community matters in this conversation is because what we're really going to talk about is governance. How are decisions made? How are resources allocated? How are people mobilized? And what do you do when they disagree? That's the core problem that exists in these kind of projects. Maya Center, kind of like Kilfenor, a very small place, happened to be on the edge of what became a huge natural preserve in Belize to create a crossing path for jaguars in the country. Part of a hemispheric jaguar preservation project. It's a gigantic preserve. The folks in Maya Center had moved up out of Guatemala a few years earlier. Most of them lived in a village down on the main road, and a few lived in a park. When the park was farmed, the people in the park were expelled. As usually, conservationists do, they throw everybody out and they're doing better. They threw these folks out and sent them down the hill, told them they couldn't hunt in the park anymore, told them they couldn't fish in the park anymore, told them they had to make a living. They got downtown and discovered that the folks downtown, I'm using downtown metaphorically, had already taken all the land. There was really no place for them to go and live. And the result, there was a degree of hostility that's almost impossible to articulate. The group that came out of the park hates the people they live with. There's only a town of 450 people. They hate the people who they live with. When I was doing my study, I was surveying people, and I put a question in which I thought was a throwaway. Do you consider this a harmonious community on a scale of 1 to 5? I figured everybody said 5. Everybody did say 5, except here. Here, the average was a 3 because I had a lot ones and a few fives. People really don't like each other. It's divided on family grounds. They have turned that into a division on political grounds. There are two parties in Belize, the two factions of different parties. It's divided into religious grounds. Last time I was down there, the folks who moved in had built their own church because they broke away from the existing church. You have a situation where everybody in town disagrees. So it's a community. It's a physical community. It's got a history, and they all hate each other. The only institution in the village that functions across those lines is the Maya Center Women's Home. And they do it through governance mechanics that are so ornate that nobody could have invented them from the outside. And we'll get to that. On the other hand, the Valdecornia Park System was produced under the inspiration of an archaeologist from Siena called Frankovich, who had the idea as the town of Piombino was sinking with the world steel industry. His idea was we need to have something else to do, and we have lots of archaeology here. His site was Argo San Silvestro. They have Roman ruins, they have Etruscan ruins, and they have incredible natural resources. Forest parks with archaeology in it, beach parks that are some of the nicest in Italy. And the idea was, why can't we all get together and make something? What they made was a public-private partnership of 5 communae up in the Piombino region, originally 13 or 14, I can't remember which, private companies in the tourism industry.
When was this done? What years? 80s, 90s?
This was in the 80s. 25 years ago, so I think the early 90s. So the original idea of the park system was that it would be a public-private partnership. They were allowed, in some people's view, because it involved medieval stuff originally, and the superintendents didn't care, they were allowed to run the site. They were then allowed to pick up Papulonia and Barati, so they became a public-private venture that was responsible for the management, the conservation, the public presentation, and everything else of archaeological sites. Almost unheard of in Italy. It functioned very well. It grew very fast. Within about 10 years, they not only had the 3 sites, they have 5 museums, they opened up 2 forest parks, opened up the beaches, and it had become a major destination in Italy. And we'll come back and talk about how it worked and why it worked. But the issue of the park was it was a unique structure, governance structure, that helped to bring the community together, right? The 5 legal entities, and had a public involvement that meant that it wasn't just a political thing, that you had a constituency. The government in 2007 passed a law saying, no, we made a mistake, no private parties can ever be involved in running an archaeological site. In 2011, just as the crash came, Piombino bought out, well, it was the only village with any money, they bought out all of the all the private participants in the company. Immediately thereafter, the Italian government went into a tailspin, terrible economic problems, and cuts to local government services. The province of Livorno, I think, was abolished. As a result of that, the mayor of Piombino, who had ambitions to serve in the national legislature, which he does, decided that he was collecting all the money for the park system and handing it over. He decided one year he wasn't going to do it. And the result of that political problem was a huge crisis for the park, which it has survived with great pain. But what I want to focus you on is it's an entity that on economic grounds, as we'll discuss, was immensely successful, got undercut by a governance system that didn't work anymore.
It's important here to remember he's showing different cases of community projects where community management has functioned, but every community ceramic their place. It was one single person, a ceramist, a normal person, who had the idea to develop this kind of hub of buying and toilets place. In the second one, it was the community, so the major and the schools and the priests and so on. And in the third case, that in Tuscany, it was one university professor very involved with the local community, Riccardo Franco. So it's not that community projects have to be constructed in the same way. It's not that they have to be constructed bottom up. It can also be top down. It's the same. It may function depending on different causes.
So the other thing we need to realize is we're not, as a discipline, very good at this. The numbers of successful projects that have been documented is very small. Because people don't like to admit their failures, the numbers of unsuccessful projects is even smaller. In fact, I think there's only 3 papers I'm aware of that talk about failure, and they're all in the Burtenshaw and I did 5 years ago. However, let's take these 2 examples. Red Bank in Belize. Red Bank is a little town not far from Maya Center. They have a unique heritage resource, which is to say they have a bunch of trees at the back of the village, and for some reason, for 2 months a year, most of the scarlet macaws in Belize come and sit in the trees. You ever see a scarlet macaw? It's a big, giant, beautiful red bird. And if you can imagine thousands of them in one place, flapping around and so it becomes a tourist attraction.
Say, the parrots? Kakatua parrots or
Parrot, yeah, they're kind of, macaws are big parrots. I mean, birds are this big. They're big birds. And there's a lot of them, okay? This is something, and the village said what happened was, because Red Bank is not very far from the part that some of the touristy areas in Belize, you can drive out there, usually drive anywhere in Belize in a day for that. And so they didn't have, they had people driving out, going through the town, looking at the birds, ooh and ah, get back in their van and go back to the hotel. Nothing was staying in town. So they said, we local people really want to have something to capture them. So we want a center where we can have our crafts sold, like Maya Center. We want to have a place where we can serve them some food. So we got a restaurant and money sticks in the restaurant. We want a place where they can stay overnight. So they put in an application to the EU for a grant to build this thing, and they knew about as much about what they were going to do as I just said. Craft center, some food, someplace to sleep. And they heard nothing. Until one November, somebody from the EU, it was early November, called and said, if you can build it and finish it by the end of the year, we'll pay for it. Well, they didn't have a plan. They had no community group to wrap around it. But they had to build a building. So they built a building. I was there not long after it opened the first time. There was one woman in there making little beads and trying to sell them. That was their crafts, because they had nothing organized to put anything economically to it. The rooms they had built for visitors in a fairly heavily mosquito-infested part of Belize had holes in the walls to the outside that thick, which meant that basically when you went to bed and then you wake up in the morning just puffed up beyond belief. And there was no restaurant. I went back 3 years later, and it was locked up tight, closed. This is a picture from the first time. The grass was up over the windows. It was gone. It was a complete failure. 300,000 euros wasted. Destroyed below it is the museum in San Vincenzo al Volturno, which is a site that my good friend Richard Hodges excavated many years ago. It's a very important Carolingian era cathedral and monastery. A wonderful site. The site is way downhill from this museum, which is up the hill from the site. There's no particular obvious way to get there. But they built this building, cost 20 million euros to build this building. Moved all of the finds from San Vincenzo into the building, locked the doors and lost the key. And when I went there, when I took this picture, it was about 3 years ago, Richard and I went down, and we were there with the superintendenza gentleman. He had no idea how to get into the building. None. It had never been opened. There was no plan to develop this museum once they built it. They just built a museum. Richard got into it last year, and what he found was the boxes were there still on the floor unopened. The vitrines were still there empty. The coffee cups that had been left behind when they moved out were still there with the coffee grounds dried up in the box. They had literally done nothing for about 20 years. Complete waste of money. So we want to spend some time understanding why do some of these things work and why do some of these things not work, and what lessons can we learn about how to proceed. The main point I want to make here, I want to emphasize this, because I am an entrepreneur of sorts. I do business. It's not the failures that are the problem. We are a risk-averse discipline in many respects. We don't want to fail, and we don't want to admit failure, and we don't want to talk about failure, and we don't want to publish failure. So you can't find a lot of places to go to learn about how not to do something like this because nobody wants to talk about it. The folklore in archaeology is the world is literally failed site museums. I saw one in Devin in Armenia 2 years ago, built by the Russians. The artifacts are still in the cases, but they're using it as a storeroom. Nobody talks about it. We have to be willing as a profession to take risks, to maybe break some things, to maybe have a site that gets damaged. But in order to have things actually work and be sustained and go forward, we've got to both talk about what worked and learn from it, and talk about what didn't work and learn from that. And we're not.
The problem is that generally much of, let's say, researchers get money to do research, and not to build things, just to do research. In 90% of the cases, at the end of the 2-3 years research,
right,
the objectives have not been reached. It's very strange that somebody finishes what he got. Just imagine.
There's very little incentive for academic archaeologists to do this kind of work, and if they fail, nobody wants to publish
cares.
it.
I mean, there's no one institution, a bank, government, region, or ministry who controls. You said you were going to do this, to publish this,
yep,
to do this database, and controls. Did you do it?
No.
No. But don't they care? You get. You get funding again and again. Sometimes to do the same project, yeah, and sometimes you get double money
we published
for something
paper
that you
yep,
failed before. So I'm not surprised.
No, we published a paper in 2014 by Gould O'Reilly about his program Heritage Watch in Angkor Wat that nobody would publish because it's a failure. He kept trying to tell the world this is what we did wrong, and nobody would publish it. So we're going to try to see what we can learn. I'm trying to categorize this into four lessons, if you will. 1, local vision is really important. 2, we have to deal with the capacity issue. Local places don't know how to do this. 3, how they manage themselves, their governance infrastructure is fundamental to whether this can be successful. And 4, I want you to understand the concept of clusters and supply chains as an essential element of why some things work and why other things don't. Okay? So, taking them one at a time. Local vision. The fellow on the left, and his wife, Ernesto Saki, lives in Maya Center in Belize. He was, when the women's group was founded, the mayor of the village and also the head of the park. So he had an interesting dual role. When visitors started going into the park, what was happening was everybody wanted to get a bit of the visitor money. So the little kids who were storing up beads and things their parents made would literally jump out of their schoolroom seats and run out when they heard a car and try to stop the car and sell them beads. Ernesto's view was that was not productive for the long-term, life of these kids. So they needed to find, and there was a potential to somehow exploit this tourist traffic would benefit the community. So he had the idea. The men, for the most part, in Maya Center are out all day. They work in orange groves in the area. They go into the cities and stay there for the week and then come back. Very common in the developing world because there aren't many jobs in little towns. And then the women are there with the kids. The women didn't have any work to do either, really, so this became an opportunity for the women to use their time to take care of the kids, but also make some cash. He brought the women together. The men objected. They built a small center for there to be a crafts co-op. The men burned it down. He went back in and finally got them all to agree, and they raised, remember this is a town where everybody hates everybody. He got a new building built, and the women came together, and he spent about 5 years coaching them, because he did understand some accounting and understood a bit about management and things like that, coaching them on how to think through the governance mechanics, which we'll get to in a minute, of this group of people who hate each other. And it was an immensely successful operation. It still is. But it wouldn't have happened if one person in the community hadn't said, we need to do something. This was not brought in from outside. This was not an archaeologist coming in and saying, I'm going to do something good for you. It was you coming to me, the archaeologist or somebody, and saying, I need some help. I have an idea. They're entrepreneurs in a very real sense. Ricardo Frankovich, we talked about a few minutes ago, archaeologist from Siena, well-respected and well-beloved man in Italy. And his idea was we can save the Val of Cornina if we can create an economic engine out of our heritage. He had the contacts with the local governments. He understood the local environment. He was from Siena, but his life's work was in the Maremma, and that's where he was from. So he was, in a sense, yes, top down, because he was a professor and all this, but he also was bottom up. He wasn't a professor from the University of Indiana. He wasn't born in Chicago. He was born and raised and worked and lived in the area he was trying to help. So again, it was a local vision from someone who had some sophistication. On the other hand, in Kilfenora, you had the local priest, who was educated the way Catholic priests were educated. You had the local school teacher, and, as I got the history most importantly, you had one local farmer who was sort of seen as the guy. He's the man that if he says it's a good idea, everybody will fall in the line. Just from moral power of having been in the community. So those three went to the Shannon Airport Authority and said, we have an idea, and we need help. In Rachi, it was a potter. If I'm willing to bet, in those days, virtually no education, except how to make pots. Who said, if we're going to do this tourist thing, we could make some money off of this. So how about giving us, how about if we organize ourselves and see what we can do? So the core of my point here, we found this over and over again in the Sustainable Preservation Initiative. If we go into places and there are local people who want to do something, it often takes only a little bit of money and some outside help to make something work. You go into a place and people are kind of, we're not interested. It is an utter waste of time. It will not be. Local vision, seeing the need, and being energetic enough to pull people together behind it is critical. That's point one. Point two, local people don't necessarily know how to do what they want to do. So you can't just, with the exception of the project in Kilfenora, where in Rachi, Associazione Chiacchiere, where they didn't need a lot of money, they knew how to make the crafts, they knew how to build a table and put it in the marketplace, and they could figure out how to organize themselves. In reality, everybody else has needed some kind of help. Everybody has needed technical assistance, training on product designs, training on product production, training on how do you do accounting or how do you manage your books. You know, this is just the way it is. These are not people who have grown up learning the skills of running a small business, nor learning the mechanics of how to govern an operation. So the result of that is that you have a need in all of these projects for them to have some help. The trick is, how do you do it? The trick is, do you go in and say, this is how to do it? Or do you try to teach them and let them articulate what they need to do and figure out solutions for themselves? What I will call, stealing from somebody else, light touch interventions. The role, and we'll get to this at the end, the role of the expert is to help, not to dictate. But it starts with local vision. It then goes to capacity. What kind of capacity training? Well, in SPI, we have done everything from building buildings, something we don't do anymore because we concluded it really wasn't a very good use of money, to providing marketing assistance, product design assistance, helping organize distribution channels for people who are a little bit out of the way so the products can get to a market. We have provided some working capital, startup capital, so that when the business starts, if you have to go out and buy your first load of raw materials to make your product, these aren't people who have mountains of cash. Maybe you need a few $1,000s to get started, and we can do that. We do it usually these days with a loan. You know, where it's a grant that goes through a revolving working capital fund, where, you know, if we give the group the money for the first project, then when they sell it, they have to put the money back into the fund to pay for the next one and create their own capital system. We help with people management, we help them think about governance, but they design their own institutions. Our experience has been that successful community projects really need to have underneath them somewhere an economic project. I would point to, I think yesterday, I can lose track of what I've said where these days, but my colleague at Penn, Richard Leventhal, has been working for years in Mexico, a place called Teosuco, which has a significant ancient Maya heritage around it that the people there could care less about, and a significant heritage related to the caste war of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, which is very, very important to them. So important that they basically kept the world away up until about 6 years ago. Nobody knew where it was, they wouldn't tell anybody it was, they wouldn't show them where it was in the jungle. They finally decided, and Richard had been going down there for years, so they knew him and eventually came to trust him, and they had decided they wanted to do something economically, touristically, to build their local economy with the caste war heritage, as well as help preserve it because the buildings were starting to fall down. So they brought him in, he's had this big project going on down there to help the community do what it wanted to do through its organizations, which will both document it archaeologically, but also help create what we hope will be a sustainable enterprise. Driven by a local concern that for literally decades protected the place as heritage, but when they wanted to actually move on it, it was because of economic rationale. So the economics is not the only reason people do things, but it's a very important reason.
Would you say that these communities have, let's say, ideas, but mainly driven, as you said, by economics, and when somebody like Ricardo, or let's say more top-down approach that increases the heritage value, or there are some projects in which everything is together done by the community. So I always see a lot of economic inputs, and maybe the use that we can do to these projects is to driven them for more, let's say, cultural.
I think the...
So what can be our role there?
I think the role will depend on the place. Let me come back to that. Okay, I have a slide on that. Let me come back to that. The role depends place and what it needs. And that's what we've learned at SPI is every community is different, its needs are different, its capacities are different, and there is no cookie cutter. Now, just so you know what you're looking at, that's the Maya Center Women's Group, that's their shop. We're going to get how they run all this. She's making what I call faux heritage, putting Maya calendars onto slate. They carve them. Slate carving is a big thing in Belize. It has no real roots in Belizean culture, but they sell a lot of them. The Maya calendar is real. This is in Pachacamac in Peru. It's an SPI project. There we work with a local group this was stimulated by the local museum, to get to your top-down point, Alexander. The curator of the local museum, who's an archaeologist, was concerned about looting, was concerned about infringement on this massive site, and wanted people to come in and wanted to do something with some group of local community members who might be able to translate into the surrounding town the importance of the site. So we helped them put a group together. We funded the construction of a building. We funded the design work and the product development work so that they could have stuff that was sellable. The building is right by the entrance to the site and to the site museum, which is a nice, large museum. And it has been extremely successful. We've got about 25 people working there. They all make more than the minimum wage in Peru. Our investment has been returned in revenues in 3.5 years, and it's a viable, ongoing business. The local archaeologist reports that even though the numbers are small, she's convinced that that's the reason the incidences of looting and encroachment have dropped dramatically in the last 3 years. From my point of view, this is as close to a success story as it gets. Local community builds project, looters and encroachers go away, everybody's happy. It doesn't happen, but it can. So, the third lesson is the governance lesson. I want to talk about this in two levels. One is what do you deal with in a small place? Small places are very different. My original research interest was in looking at whether theories of Eleanor Ostrom and trying to have a common pool of sources had any application to what we do in archaeology. That's why I did work in Kiltimar and Maya Center and in Peru. Ostrom, her roots are, she won the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2009. She was a political scientist. She passed away in 2011. Her work was basically attacking intellectually one of these core premises of the theory we talked about yesterday, which is that you're all enthusiasts, and you're all going to destroy the commons, and you're all going to do nothing but maximize your utility and maximize your profits, and you're going to do nothing but make havoc and not cooperate. She said, you know, this actually started at a conference where there was a group of them sitting around a table and discussing this tragedy of the commons, which was standard economic theory. And they said, you know, well, I've got this case in Nepal where that didn't happen. I've got this case in somewhere else where it didn't happen. By the end of the evening, they had, a dozen cases, so they got curious. So they started looking at cases. At the end of the year, they had 1,000 cases. By now, they've got thousands of cases in the digital library of the commons, if you're interested in it. All about the fact that, in fact, what we've learned about economic theory in the last 30 years is that it's not that people are always greedy, uncooperative, profit-seeking, utility maximizing. It's they sometimes are. And sometimes they're very cooperative. And it depends on how the interactions are structured, how people are going to behave. So out of her work, she wrote a book called Governing the Commons in 1990, which has laid out sort of the classic view of how you govern a common pool resource. That is something that you all share and you could destroy, but you decide not to. Think fisheries, think irrigation systems, think grazing lands, think forest projects.
This is a very important concept, the commons. It's something that we are going to hear in the next conference also. What is a common? Because it is obviously related to community.
Yes. It's a shared resource that some group of people can manage, and if they choose to manage under the right structures, can manage successfully so they don't destroy it.
And of course, there are the cultural commons.
Agricultural commons are the standard.
Should be common good.
So what a rules work is first, the place itself has to be well defined, the commons has to be well defined, and those who are empowered to use it has to be well defined. So in Maya Center, for example, if you live in Maya Center, if you're registered to live in Maya Center, you can be part of the group. If you were registered to live in Rachi, which is where everybody is, you could be part of the group. If you weren't, you couldn't. So the boundaries have to be clear. The rules have to be conformed to local conditions, and I'll come back to that because it's fundamental. I'll give you an illustration. There need to be some sort of collective choice arrangements. You can't be a dictator. There can't be somebody in the community, even if they're the leader of the project, who just says this is how it's going to be, where it falls apart. There's got to be some kind of legitimate decision-making process, usually democratic. You have to be able to set rules collectively inside the organization and monitor compliance with the rules. You can't contract that out to the county police department. If you're going to have rules for your co-op, you need to set the rules, and you need to make sure people follow them. It also turns out that if you're going to have rules and you're going to have penalties, they need to be what you call graduated sanctions. The punishment needs to fit the crime. But they discovered, and some of this research is some of the most heavily researched psychology research in the world, because economists, psychologists, political scientists, and others are all interested in this. And these tests have been redone. What they found is that if you have draconian rules, if you don't come to work tomorrow, you're fired. Well, that turns out not to be a very effective thing. On the other hand, if you don't come back to work tomorrow, you're going to fine you $5. If you don't show up for your cleanings report on next weekend, I'm going to fine you $10. If you open up a competing crafts co-op, you're out. Okay? So you've got graduated sanctions, the punishment fits the crime. That turns out to work very well, and it turns out that the low-level offenses, if you hit those hard, the high-level offenses don't happen very much. It's an interesting group dynamics thing that comes out of all this behavioral economics. So monitoring appropriations, graduated sanctions, conflict mechanisms have to exist inside the institution at low cost to resolve differences. And she said, somehow institutions have to have a minimal recognition from the government that they are allowed to do what they want to do. So let's look at some very different cases here. In the case of Kilfenora, the Burren Center, the governance mechanics are really very simple. It's a reasonably homogeneous place. There's a culture in the community that is deeply driven by volunteers. There are 450 people in that community, and I identified 40 volunteer groups. And these are not like small things. This is like one of the nation's leading cable bands. It's a co-op that builds and funds and manages a big sports field that cost them well over £1 million to build, and they fund it out of a local lottery that everybody buys a lottery ticket. Things like that. Enormous commitment to the community and willingness to invest in the community. When they set up the Burren Center, they offered shares to the community, and most of the people who lived in the town at the time bought a share. Some bought a lot of shares, they had some money. But they didn't want to have somebody be able to buy up the shares and take over the co-op. So they have a rule, no matter how many shares you own, you only get one vote as a main vote. It's interesting, you find out in Maya Center, they set it up so families only have one vote. In Kilfenora, they set it up so families only have one vote. Lots of things to do to try to not have the institution hijacked. Then they said, we're going to structure this as a profit-making business. It's a co-op. They can principal, could make money and distribute it. They have to keep reinvesting in it. They not only turned it into an economic engine for the entire region, but they have been able to build the community around it, the physical and the personal community. They have a coffee house, a tea house down the side of the street there that practically everybody in town comes into. Turns out in Maya Center, practically everybody who's out and about will go by the women's group building at some point to say hi. Turns out in Machi, where everybody's down in the village selling, if they're in town and they're not selling, they're still coming by. And it's a big social center. These things become community builders, even as they are being economic engines and providing jobs and activity. And those are, I think, probably some deeply interrelated phenomena in small places. What the Maya Center people had to deal with is the fact that everybody hates everybody. So they had to figure out, how do you create leadership? They also, not only they hate each other, they're 15 miles and they don't have cars from the nearest bank. And whereas in Kilfenora, everybody was handling their own money. They had their own table, they had their own goods, they sold them, they put them in their pockets and went home. So the group didn't have to handle much money. Here, they all run the shop cooperatively. Everybody's stuff is identified, and they have a book that they keep to track all the sales. But how do you make sure you're not getting ripped off? And how do you make sure the group doesn't get ripped off? They also collect ticket money for the entrance fees to the sanctuary, and that money goes to the Police Audubon Society, so they have a fiduciary job with you too. There's a lot of money sloshing around this place, and they don't have a bank. So they did two amazingly creative, complicated things. On the political side, they replace their board every 2 years, and the issue would be, obviously, well, who's going to get elected? Which faction's going to win? What do you do? Well, the answer is, their system is, you have to be nominated by another member of the group for an office and agree to run. The trick is, you don't agree to run for a particular office. You agree to run for an office. They get 8 or 9 candidates or something like that. They vote on them. The person who gets the most votes is the president, whether she wants to be or not. The person that gets the second most votes is the vice president, whether she wants to be or not. So if you've got somebody who's really partisan and gets nominated, you either don't give them a job or you give them a crummy job. So they've been able to get some consensus around leadership because they essentially have depoliticized their own internal political process. The other thing they did, and we don't have time to go into the real money management stuff, but in order to manage the money, they created a system where first, when you're working your 3 days a month in the shop, you hold all the money for the day. They have 3 different businesses there. They have a crafts business, they have a corn milling operation, and they sell sockets and stuff and fees. One of each of the people takes home one of the buckets of money, and they hold it for a month. So by the end of the month, all the money for the month has been distributed around all the members of the group. Every transaction has been written in a book, and if you were to go there and stand, the first thing a woman does when she walks up onto the porch of the Maya Center Wings Group is grab the book and see how much stuff she sold. So they all know how much they should be owed. At the end of the month, the leadership of the group is required to come in and go through the book, and each of the 7 officers has to independently come to the same answer about who's owed what. And each has to independently come to the same answer about who took home how much money. And then they develop a netting mechanism, and then they all get a cell phone blast one afternoon that says, tomorrow morning, you come in with 20 pounds, and tomorrow morning we're going to give you 30 pounds, that kind of thing, because they figured it all out. But everybody has to agree. So it's a huge checks and balance system because nobody trusts them. Kilfenora runs very differently. It's a normal European kind of company. They publish their books, they do an audit. Most people in town really don't pay any attention. There's much more money sloshing through there because it's a fairly big business at this point. They have 15 people on the staff, they have a couple million pounds of turnover sometimes, but nobody pays a lot of attention because of the trust. So again, local people figured something out. I would defy any expert to have come up with the way they run the place in Lansing. It had to be done by the local people who were motivated to make it work and come up with a system that could solve their unique problem. But that's small scale. When you get to larger scale, you run into a whole other category problem. This is an area where, quite frankly, we don't really have good answers to this one. I'm going to a conference next week at Indiana at the Ostrom Center where we're going to begin talking about is, does anybody have any ideas about how to solve these problems? When you get to this scale, the Parque de la Valdecornilla got 5 local community governments, each of whom has some contentious different issues, some of whom benefit more than others from the park, some of whom have local needs that are different. You have to manage a large-scale operation. As I said, they are responsible for the public presentation, the preservation and conservation and management of 3 important archaeological sites, 2 big parks and 2 beach systems, and 5 museums. So it's a big operation. They have invested over the years 25 or 30 million euros in buildings and things like that. And they got to get annual budget after. The problems that they had when the national Italian government changed the rules on who can own one of these places were substantial. And they had one of the problems that came out of kicking out all the private sector people was that they lost their connection to the local community, the people who live around in the valley. Now, and would you call all the people who live in all those towns a community? I wouldn't, but they were legally bound together because they shared the park system. They're certainly not, they have some commonalities and background and experience, but they're coming from different places, they've got different issues, different career paths, different lifestyles. And what happened when the private sector guys went away was the folks who rooted in those local communities with that the economic interests that go with being a business person in those places. They were lost. And all the park had was a bunch of feuding mayors. And the feuding mayors were basically, they got elected by their community to take care of them. Not to think about the greater interest, which the business types would be more inclined to because they were mostly in the tourism industry and they shared stuff. So the park system has really had a hard time because they weren't able to deal with the disruption of the government policy. So back to Ostrom's point about minimal recognition, in effect they lost the government recognition for the thing that made the place work. And they have been and will continue to struggle because they don't have the authority to do what they need to do. They've proven that non-government entities can in fact do a good job managing and presenting and conserving archaeological resources. But they're not allowed to do it anymore.
Have you understand the problem here? So they have this old structure developed by local entities and privates, and then a certain one has a function very well.
And because of the general economic framework, these states decided to take in hand and everything fails. Okay?
The last thing I wanted to cover from a structural point of view was this idea of clusters and networks and supply chains. One of the reasons I would argue that something like the museum in San Vincenzo failed was that it was a museum. They just built a building. No one thought about what does it take to make something like that viable. If we were sitting in a business course, I'd have a chart up there that said something like, here's how you deliver a box of soap. I have this chart. Here's how you deliver a box of soap to the supermarket, right? Well, you start with somebody, a chemical company, who makes all the chemicals, and a packaging company that makes the boxes. You'll send all of those things to a company and assume it's going into a plastic bottle, so you also need a plastic bottle manufacturer who send things to an assembler who puts the soap into the plastic bottle, puts the plastic bottle into a box, puts that into a case. Then that case gets put on a truck and sent to a warehouse. It then gets put on another truck and sent to the retailer's back office, who then has to break it up and put 20 bottles of dish soap on a shelf so you can buy it and take it home. That whole process and we could go backwards into where the chemicals come from, and maybe they come from a petrochemical company, maybe they come from something else. You may start with an oil company and end up with a box of dish soap, or a bottle of dish soap. That entire thing is called a supply chain. And if you think about how something like tourism really works, it works because of a very complicated supply chain. Yeah. What you sell in tourism, if you look at it commercially, is you sell an experience. You're selling somebody the ability to go do something that they're going to enjoy and remember. But it's just not the experience of, going out to the square and how. It's how did I get here? Where did I stay? How was the food? Were the people nice? And on and on. So, by the way, there's an open source version of paper behind this if you want it. I can send it to you. So if you think about what delivers that experience, where there's some first line touch points, local hotels, food services, the tour organizers, local guides, things like that, people who manage the sites, retailers, craft producers, DMOs, destination management organizations in the tourism language, or often clusters, business groups and things like that are trying to make sure that they're the right kinds of events and stuff like that. And those people are all being supported by the banks, by the people who supply. Think about every restaurant has to have linens, every hotel has to have linens. All these places have to have food. They got to buy silverware. They got to buy china. They need uniforms. All this stuff has to come from somewhere. Local agencies, how they behave, the international hospitality companies. I mean, in most big cities, you've got Marriott hotels, Hilton hotels, things like that. Those are foreign companies who have to be part of the party. The airline companies, the train companies, things like that. What kind of experience did I have? If I have a terrible time getting here because the plane was late and then the train broke down, and I've already eaten Patrick before I walked in the door. Right? So making sure that bit of the chain works to deliver the experience, because what I want you to do is walk out the door and say, that was amazing. That takes a lot of these things working in harmony over time consistently to deliver that was an amazing experience. That's the supply chain concept. Now, the other thing that you got to realize, which the Val de Cornea illustrated incredibly well, is that one place, it's very hard to develop a really good experience with just one place. I want to come back to that in a second. And all of these folks have to collaborate, which means you want a supply chain that works. You want the people in the supply chain to be networked, a network of relationships that's tight and complex so that people can solve problems. And you want a cluster, if you can possibly get it, to create more and more reasons for people to come. So, when it works, and it did work in the Val de Cornea, not only grew very rapidly over 25 years, but my colleague Anna Paolini and I have been working with her for about 6 years, and she did a survey years ago, a master's thesis, that Tim Chabot and I supervised. And because Richard Hodges wanted somebody to go do this work. So we did it. We went up there and she did this study. And the results of having all of these sites come together in a relatively short period of time to make this tourist offer were amazing. This is a place off the coast of Piombino is Elba. There's 1 million people a year go through Elba. Go through Piombino to go to Elba on the ferry. Almost none of them stop in Piombino. Her study found that of the hundreds of thousands of people who go to the Val de Cornea parks, only 12% also went to Elba. So that became the destination. They stay in the area, and they stayed for an average of 12 days. There was so many, the Elba visitors are in and out in a day, they're in and out in 2 days. These people stayed for 12 days because there's so much to do. They came from all over Europe, lots of Germans, probably not surprising to those of you here, but all over Europe, not a lot of Italians, mostly foreign tourists. They're bringing foreign exchange, they're bringing hard cash, right? Good stuff. When she asked them why they came, more than half said they came because of the mix of things to do. They all said they want to go to the beach, beautiful beaches. But they came because there are things to do. If it rains, you can go to a museum. If you get sunburned, you can go to an archaeological site. Most of them bought, the vast majority bought the combo ticket. In the second tier places, some of the little museums, like the Museo della Ceramica, the response from people was, well, I heard about this museum when I bought the combo ticket. So it was stimulating demand in places people wouldn't have gone to have the cluster, the collection of assets. 76%, more than half, just over half, 50.2%, had been to the Val di Cornia before. 3/4 of them said they were going to come back again. And the main reason, cited by a third of it, was they're going to come back because there's so much else to do. So creating something that can work, you know, for community development, for economics, etc., really requires recognition that one little museum up on a mountaintop with no plan for what the supply chain is to get them there and no real reason to go except to drive way out of an alternative, see the site and go to the museum. Unless you're really an aficionado, you're not going to do that. But if you have a community that's well networked, you've got a cluster of sites, and you can then put the supply chain together, then you can create something like this. Okay? They don't always work, however, and we have to be hard-nosed and realistic about this. This is a place called Tanta in Peru. It's on the Capacñan, which is the Inca Road, which was made a World Heritage Site a few years ago. Our colleague in SPI, Luis Castillo, was the Vice Minister of Culture, when Capacñan was named. He asked us to go to look at it because when they, let me underline this, this is mistake number one, not to make. When they did the Capacñan process to get it through the UNESCO, they went to hundreds of communities around Peru, and one of the things promised them all that the economic benefit would come from this. Had no idea what they were going to do. They said, it's going to be good for you. You're going to get economic benefit. So they get the UNESCO grant, and we get a call and say, hey, can you guys come back and figure out how we do this? So we did. We did a site visit that took us first to five sites along the Pachacamac-Jauja segment of the Capacñan, and Tanta was one of those places. Here we had the local leadership. The woman up there on the right, absolute dynamo. I mean, this woman, amazing woman. Put together a community group, set up competing craft co-ops. Had that community ready to go. The problem was the products were not sold. I had to start from this. I wanted to start all over in my life. I can't wear it for very long because it's pure alpaca. But nobody would ever buy it, if it were for sale at the store, because it's ugly. But it's really warm. But the point is, they had the leadership. They could have been trained. But where is Jauja? Where is Tanta? Tanta is literally in the middle of nowhere. It's the site of the famous 1,000 steps on the Capacñan. Those are her husband's llamas, and they use it every day. It's an amazing countryside. I mean, I could give you a tour for an hour of pictures, and you wouldn't get bored because it's so beautiful. But you might get bored. But the real is they're in the middle of nowhere. It's 9 hours from Lima to get there. The roads are terrible. It's so ill-marked in that part of Peru that we met a group of backpackers who were being led on a tour in a car. They were really backpackers, rough sleepers, I guess. They were, going low rent around Peru, and they were supposed to meet us here. We went separate ways, and they're supposed to end up there. They never showed up. And we saw them 2 days later, and they said, what happened to you guys? Well, we came out a little late, it got dark, and we got lost. And we didn't know what to do, so we just stopped and slept out. Now, the problem with sleeping out was it dropped to like 20 degrees. You didn't have sleeping bags. It was a mess. You can and they had a professional guide driving, and you didn't know where they were. So your place is brilliant, sir. That is the best hotel room in the city, okay? The back wall is the wall because the people next door watch television until 10:30 at night, so you couldn't go to bed. I'm not sure if that was the roof or not. It didn't rain. I can tell you it was so cold, the only way to sleep was to put on all your clothes, put on all your sweaters and parkas, climb inside your sleeping bag, and then get under about 6 Peruvian blankets. Like this thick. Then you were okay to sleep. That's the stairway up to the best hotel room. Okay? That's the best restaurant. That's the only restaurant. So you have an infrastructure, and you say, well, could we ever justify putting the money into building the kinds of accommodations that would work to get tourists to get out there? The other complication was the trek itself is 16.5 kilometers at 5,000 and change meters. There's no way out. If you have a heart attack halfway in, you have to walk out dead or alive. So you've got to fix problems like this. You know, what do you do to make this plausible to get enough people out there to have it work economically?
And the way for politicians, do local people, indigenous people, so that fantastic moment, want to be in UNESCO side?
No, they didn't
change their way of life?
It means
or...
nothing. It meant nothing.
Okay.
It meant nothing.
But they really don't care, and I think they do good.
They use it every day. The Campagnan is retired because they use it every day. It's an economic resource for them. That's what it's for. But you can't do what you want to do. Paul Burtenshaw, my colleague, and I were so frustrated. We really wanted this one to work because the community was there. But there was no way you could pour $1 million into this place and it wouldn't work. So we couldn't do it. So it doesn't work everywhere. And if you don't get the cluster supply chain network idea right, you're going to have some real problems. So quickly on conclusions. 1, places can self-organize. The idea that this is Ostrom's concept. Things can happen from the bottom up. People can set their own course. And we have to let them, we have to recognize how important the local leadership is, and we have to support them. But we also have to recognize that the role of experts and outsiders is constrained. We can't do it for them. We can train, we can help, we can offer ideas, we can suggest places to go look for examples. People used to come from all over Belize to the Maya Center Room Street because Belizeans are notorious for hating each other. It's not a unique town. And so the solutions they had to how to make something work in an environment where nobody trusts anybody turned out to be very important. But it's not like I'm going to walk in and say, well, you can have Maya Center, this is how you should do it. It's going to be like, let's go to Maya Center and talk to your peers. See if that might work. Light touch support, capacity building, but they have to do it themselves. And we can't ignore the financial requirements. A place like that's expensive. And it's going to cost money, which means you've got to have the infrastructure. Sometimes these things can be very informal, as they are in Kilpanora. Sometimes they have to be very formalized corporate entities, like the Burns Center, because they have to go to the bank, or they have to get grants, and they have to be able to, you can't give a grant to a non-thing. You have to legally exist in order to get a grant. Legal existence means you have to meet certain legal requirements and certain kind of reporting requirements. And A, you've got to recognize you've got to do it, and B, you've got to recognize that they may not know how to do it, so that's part of the assistance. And finally, you have to recognize that to the extent you're going to look at philanthropy, increasingly people want to know, what have you accomplished? What's the social impact, the economic impact, the value, back to our conversation yesterday, of what you're doing? Because I'm not going to give you money just because it's a nice thing to do.
For you.
For me. Yeah. I'm going to give you money because you're making a difference in the world. And we have to recognize that that's where financing is going. It's not just us. I mentioned Cultural Heritage Counts for Europe yesterday. The governments are exactly in the same place. Prove to us that what you're doing actually makes a difference, because there's too many demands out there, and we can't do it this way anymore. So with that, thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. If you want to read more about economics and archaeology, there are 3 books in existence. I don't know if there are any more. I don't think so.
We have them all in the library, so everything's here.
That one you can actually download all the contents for free off the internet. I assume you've got access to that kind of stuff. Happy to take questions.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Sure. At the beginning of your lecture, you mentioned how you define community as a geographical context. And I'm interested, what if in geographical spaces, a lot of communities, for example, with different languages that can't communicate with each other. And that's the question, I mean, how can we make a local vision if one village can't understand another village?
Yeah, it's a core question, right? I mean, when I say live a local place, the reason I say it that way is to capture all that complexity that's the real world. You have places where, you're going to have different languages spoken, you're going to have, family feuds, you're going to have religious differences, you're going to have lots of things going on. And the reason that I focus on the geography is precisely to highlight those issues, that you're going to have differences in contention. That's what takes you to the governance question. Now, it may be that you can't build a community-wide project. Not everybody is going to want to play. Not everyone in the community is a member of any of these organizations. And you may be in a place where, either because of language issues or religious issues or whatever, some want to do it, some don't. The judgment call becomes, is it responsible and constructive to do it with some of them, but not others? If it is, if it's okay, then it's a fine thing to do. If you're going to be sowing dissension in the community, then maybe you don't want to do that. But once you have recognized those differences exist, then your decision is whom do you want to work with and why, and then those you're working with need to be able to address the problem. But you're absolutely right.
And I just have a second one, which is a bit more theoretical, let's say. So we're talking about communities, but what is society? I mean, we can all participate in the same society, but we don't have to participate in the same community. Mm-hmm. I'm here, for example, from Croatia. Mm-hmm. I will participate in this, let's say, community of university.
Right.
I'm sorry, yeah, in society of Poland, but I'm not participating in, let's say, Italian communities. Mm-hmm. So maybe can you just underline this distinction between society and community together?
I think that's fair. The way Anderson would address that would be that there are lots of overlapping imagined communities. National communities are imagined communities. You may have Turkey, you may have Iran, but you've also got Islam. And those are all valid definitions of communities. They don't all lead to governance solutions, right? Some of those things don't govern very themselves. There's a woman working at ECROM this semester from North Carolina who's working on the coastal commons. That is to say, the sort of common problems faced by everybody on the coast of the United States who's going to be washed away through global warming. The problem and what she's trying to grapple with is, okay, that's fine, but how many different kinds of people live there? You've got racial differences, you've got ethnic differences, political differences, go down the list of differences among people across this huge expanse. And is there in fact any sort of non-coercive governance mechanism that would enable them to make decisions to benefit themselves, collectively? She hasn't got an answer to that question. And so this is the reason I get very tentative about community, other than using it as a word to highlight potential conflict, is because everybody's so different. And each one, there's an old saying about every family is unhappy in its own way. every community is unhappy in its own way, and you kind of have to figure that out and find the right solution. And not all communities, in the sense that you were using society, fit this.
The important thing is to understand that we are going to face problems when we work with communities, but at the end, in any case, we have to define it. Otherwise, we will start discussing if this is good or not. Geographical, I think, I said historical also because it's very linked. It's the same with commons. The concept of commonwealths existed in Roman times, probably still earlier. So it's also a concept that has a continuity and link us, historians or archaeologists, with this concept. Because for an economist, it's quite easy to say, I'm going to take part in the development of this community. It's obvious that communities will be very happy to collaborate with an economist because it's a knowledge that they don't have and from whom they can learn. But if we want to take part also in community projects, we have, and that was my question at the beginning, we have to show them also that we are relevant and that we are useful and that we can also, as economists, help them in a way to develop community projects. And history is in some way quite relevant because of the common problem, which comes from economics, but has an historical way, and also communities. How were these communities in the past? How were they organized? How have they changed and so on?
As we've seen, the different governance models have to be tailored on different communities. And you talk about the government role, right, okay, but practically, should the government set goals? Should the government control if these goals are reached? And what happens if these goals are not reached? Should the government step and take the control instead of the communities? And practically, what should it happen?
I guess it depends on what's at stake. If it's the management of a site, you know, the community in Rachi doesn't manage a site. The National Institute for Culture manages the site. Okay, so what they're doing essentially has very low stakes for the site. If it failed, it wouldn't be quite as an appealing place to go, but the government's not going to get it. So should the government set goals for that? No. Should they worry about it? No. If it fails, should they do something? No. On the other hand, you have the Val de Cornea. I mean, the superintendenza supervises everything that goes on at Hawaii and Popolonia and Rocco San Silvestro, and they have to approve of the conservation work. They have to approve of any excavation work that goes on, things like that, and that's appropriate because at least under the law here, they own it, right? It's their stuff. They're delegating the management of those sites. If they do a disastrous job, in that case, should the government step in and say, well, I don't think we're going to let you do this anymore? That probably makes sense. The problem is what happened here is the government stepped in and they were doing a good job and said, you have to stop because ideologically we don't think these capitalist pigs should be in the middle of this process. And that was the problem. So I think everything, like everything else, it depends on the circumstance and where you are. I mean, in Britain, so many of the museums are private. A lot of the sites are managed by local towns. You know, the stakes aren't seen to be that high. I also advocate for taking risks. I think archaeologists don't take enough risks. You know, we have to be prepared that some sites are going to get, you know, badly managed while people learn how to do this. If we lose another 4 or 5 Roman urns, does it really matter? You know, that's a whole other conversation in the archaeological world. I would say I'd rather have a community learn how to do it right and break a couple of things, or not properly conserve something, than immediately step in and sweep them out of the way and take control on the grounds that they don't know what they're doing. Particularly since this history has taught us the standards for what the right thing to do is change a lot. And, you know, we've gone in cycles from the experts doing this and telling the locals they didn't know what they were doing, going back and realizing the locals actually knew how to do it. And we did, the Masai Mara in Kenya is sort of one of the classic examples of, we threw all the Masai off the Serengeti because they were going to screw up all their cattle grazing was going to screw up the place. And the experts knew how to manage it better, and then they figured out 20 years later that all the wrong plants were growing in the wrong places because the Masai knew how to rotate the cattle to keep the bad plants out, and the smart guys didn't, so they sent the Masai back in to fix the land that smart guys screwed up. So I'm much more of a risk taker. I'm not convinced experts know much, and they certainly don't know enough to dictate the way they like to do.
But you are an economist, let's say, adult, mature, let's say. You have worked a lot in economy, and well, I'm the idea that the world is moved by economy. Mostly politicians are moved by economy.
Do you think economists know what they're doing?
No, my question is, I don't think they know, and that's the problem of our present world.
That's the problem.
I mean, they know what they're doing for themselves and for few people, but not for the world. But in general, so with such a big, let's say, that's large idea, do you think the world of cultural heritage is moving on this direction? Do you think that we have to move on this direction, or is something we are doing as an YouTube video? I mean, I will continue doing it, but do you think it's a good recommendation for young people? Move on this direction, learn about it, because the world is going to move on it.
I think the realities of money are going to dictate that we're going to have to do things differently. The national governments running everything isn't going to work. Each country is going to have to come to its own solution. The American system isn't exported. It's sort of exported to England, but I don't think you're ever going to get to anything that remotely resembles in Italy. You're never going to get to anything that remotely resembles the level of philanthropy in the United States. And that's fine. But it means that as governments get tighter and tighter and it's harder and harder to fund things, there's going to have to be some new creative solutions found. I don't know what those are. Those are for the Italian people to figure out politically. But should people be moving to think this way rather than the old way? Yeah, I don't think there is any other way. In the span of your careers.
So, which kind of skills do we have to acquire?
Skills?
Yeah.
I think the rudiments of understanding a bit about economics and business and how things work, management skills, understanding how to delegate, not how to dictate, understanding how to motivate, those kind of things are important. So it's sort of
sociology, economics, sociology, a bit of politics, and conflict
psychology. How do people work? How do people's heads tick? There's sort of what in the States we would call the liberal arts paradigm. I mean, there's a bunch of things that are outside your specialty but are really coming together. Economics is now driven by psychology. The people who win the Nobel Prize today aren't people who run econometric models. They're all people who are doing psychological. They've given it to as many non-economists as economists in the last decade or so, because the psychologists have reframed the entire corpus of theory. Remember, it's all just theory. And so I think the skill sets are fairly broad, but I think you need to be able, as I said yesterday, to walk into a room with decision makers, and when they start talking about benefits and costs, you can come right back at them. Well, I know the costs, I know how to make the costs low, and these are the benefits. Now I want my money.
Yeah, unfortunately, much of the knowledge we need to manage cultural heritage in the present, I wouldn't say in the future, but in the present, is not taught in the university. So we have to find it. Most of the students have the possibility to choose alternative subjects in the university. So I will start choosing economics, and philosophy also is quite important. So a bit understanding how to deal with people. Most of the cases are something that you have inside. If you are not politically correct, you won't be in the future. If you don't like to manage children or old people, you won't be. But at least you know that it's important and you try to. And it's impossible that we get, for me, for example, I will never get an economist because I don't know how to sum 2 plus 2. But you know that you need it, so then you ask him to help you. And it's very important to work in teams. You will never do it alone. It's basic to work in teams. So most important is not just what do we have to learn, but who should we have in a team if we want to do participatory projects like this one. That's the most important thing. Understanding what we need in order to create a good team.
One of the paradoxes of archaeology is it absorbs scientific technologies like a sponge. Somebody invents something in chemistry or physics or electronics or something, and the archaeologists are all over it, coming up with new ways to date things and analyze them and stuff. But absorbing other disciplines that have to do with social relations is something archaeology has been extremely slow. So,
maybe because it's not cool enough. Maybe because it's not cool enough.
not cool enough? Not enough.
Maybe,
Yeah.
it's a question I'm asking you. Science versus, let's say, psychology or...
It depends on the political party you're in. If you're more left, maybe you are more engaged in social things, in going to the countryside, in working with farmers, in working with the surroundings. If you are more right, then it's more... Depends, huh? It depends on... But most of the people I know working on the territory are activists.
Yeah.
With flat.
Anything else?